The phone call came at 2:37, jolting me awake from a restless sleep. My hand trembled as I reached for the device, already knowing something was wrong. The caller ID showed my brother's name, and in that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. "Sarah," his voice cracked, "you need to come home. Now." My name is Elena Martinez, and I had spent the last decade building a life far away from the toxic family dynamics that had defined my childhood. A successful environmental lawyer in Seattle, I had carefully constructed boundaries that kept me at a safe distance from the chaos that always seemed to swirl around my family. But something in my brother Michael's voice was different. Urgent, scared. By the time I arrived at my parents' house the next afternoon, the tension was suffocating. My mother sat rigidly on the living room couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. My father stood by the window, his back turned to everyone. And there, looking almost defiant, was my sister-in-law, Vanessa. "I don't know what you're all so worked up about," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. Michael pulled me aside, his voice a harsh whisper. "It's about Grandma Elena's trust fund, the one she left specifically for you. Our grandmother had been more than just a relative. She was the glue that had held our family together, the one person who truly understood the complexities of our lives. When she passed away 5 years ago, she had left a substantial trust fund specifically for me, $500,000 earmarked for my education and future." Vanessa accessed the account, Michael continued. "She somehow transferred the entire amount." I felt the blood drain from my face. Our grandmother's final gift, her ultimate expression of love and belief in my potential, was gone. Vanessa noticed my shock and couldn't help herself. She laughed, a cold, calculated sound that sent chills down my spine. "It was just sitting there," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Michael and I have expenses, a new house, car payments. It's not like you were using the money." The audacity took my breath away. I had deliberately left the trust fund untouched, respecting my grandmother's wishes. I was building my career, paying off my law school loans systematically, believing in the value of hard work over immediate gratification. My parents seemed paralyzed. My father, always conflict-averse, looked everywhere but at Vanessa. My mother's eyes were filled with a mixture of shame and fear. "How?" I managed to ask, my legal training already clicking into investigative mode. Vanessa shrugged. "I'm Michael's wife. I had access to some of his financial documents. The bank didn't ask too many questions. What she didn't know was that I had been preparing for potential family betrayals my entire life. My grandmother had taught me to always have a backup plan, to document everything, to be 3 steps ahead." The day I returned to Seattle, I made 3 critical phone calls. The first was to Mr. Harrison, the family's longtime attorney who had helped draft my grandmother's will. "Elena," he said after I explained the situation, "I suspected something might be happening. I've been tracking some unusual communications about the trust fund." The second call was to the bank's fraud department. The third was to a private investigator I had worked with on previous cases. While Vanessa celebrated her ill-gotten gains, believing she had successfully stolen my inheritance, I was meticulously building a case that would not just recover the money, but expose her complete betrayal. My grandmother hadn't just left me money. She had left me a legacy of resilience, of strategic thinking, of never allowing myself to be a victim. "This isn't over," I whispered to myself, looking out over the Seattle skyline. Not by a long shot. Little did Vanessa know, every document she had forged, every communication she had made, was about to become evidence in what would become the most significant legal battle our family had ever seen. The trust fund wasn't just about money. It was about respect. About honoring my grandmother's memory. About proving that integrity matters more than short-term gains. And I was just getting started. Would you like me to continue with the next part of the story? I can develop the narrative further, focusing on Elena's strategic approach to uncovering and confronting Vanessa's betrayal. The next morning, I arrived at my law office earlier than usual. My colleague Marcus knew something was different the moment I walked in. The determined set of my jaw, the carefully organized file folder in my hand, everything screamed that I was preparing for battle. "Walk me through everything," Marcus said, closing the door to my office. I spread out the documents I had collected, bank statements, email communications, forged signatures. Each piece told a story of calculated deception. Mr. Harrison had been right. There were inconsistencies in the trust fund transfer that went beyond a simple family dispute. Vanessa hadn't just transferred the money. She had carefully manipulated multiple financial documents to cover her tracks. She forged my signature, I explained to Marcus, but she didn't know that my grandmother always insisted on additional verification for any significant transactions. The private investigator I'd hired had already uncovered a pattern. This wasn't the first time Vanessa had attempted financial manipulation. There were hints of similar incidents in her past, small transactions, carefully hidden transfers that had gone unnoticed. By noon, I had a comprehensive file prepared. Each piece of evidence meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and verified. My legal training wasn't just a profession, it was a weapon. My phone rang. It was the bank's fraud department. "Ms. Martinez," the investigator said, "we've completed our initial review. There are significant irregularities in the trust fund transfer." The pieces were falling into place. Vanessa had made a critical mistake. In her rush to steal the money, she had left a digital trail that would be her undoing. That evening, I called my brother Michael. The conversation was not going to be easy. "I know what Vanessa did," I started, my voice calm but firm. Michael's response was defensive. "It's not what you think. We needed the money. Times are tough." "Needed the money," I repeated. "By stealing from me? From Grandma's legacy?" I could hear the conflict in his voice. Michael had always been weak-willed, easily manipulated by those closest to him. Vanessa had perfected the art of making him feel both guilty and heroic in the same breath. "I have evidence," I continued. "Enough to not just recover the money, but to potentially press criminal charges." The silence that followed was deafening. The next week was a blur of legal preparations. I filed formal complaints with the bank, initiated a forensic audit, and began preparing the groundwork for a potential lawsuit. Vanessa's confidence began to crack. I could see it in the increasingly desperate text messages, the hushed phone calls, the way she avoided direct confrontation. My mother called, her voice trembling. "Elena, please. Can't we handle this as a family?" This stopped being a family matter when Vanessa stole my inheritance. I replied coldly. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A package arrived at my office, sent by Vanessa. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "I can explain everything," the note read. Marcus looked at me skeptically. It could be a trap. But something told me this was different. This was Vanessa's attempt to control the narrative before everything fell apart. The USB drive contained a series of encrypted files. It took our forensic team nearly 2 days to crack the encryption. What we found was more shocking than the theft itself. Vanessa had been gambling, not just small amounts, but significant sums that had been slowly draining their family's finances. The trust fund wasn't just a spontaneous theft. It was a desperate attempt to cover up years of financial mismanagement. "She's been living a lie," I told Marcus, spreading out the newly discovered documents, creating an illusion of financial stability while secretly drowning in debt. The final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place, and Vanessa had no idea what was coming. My phone rang. It was the bank's senior investigator. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "we're ready to proceed with a formal investigation. Everything you've provided confirms our suspicions." I looked out my office window, watching the Seattle rain create intricate patterns on the glass. This wasn't just about recovering money anymore. This was about exposing a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Vanessa thought she had won. She thought a quick transfer and a few forged documents would be enough to steal my inheritance. She was wrong. Dead wrong. Would you like me to continue with the final part of the story where the full extent of Vanessa's betrayal is revealed and Elena takes her final strategic action? The courtroom was silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Vanessa sat rigid, her perfectly composed exterior beginning to crack under the weight of the evidence. Mr. Harrison presented the documentation with surgical precision. Bank records, forensic analysis, digital footprints, each piece of evidence a devastating blow to Vanessa's fabricated story. Not only did my client's sister-in-law illegally transfer $500,000 from a protected trust fund, Mr. Harrison stated, but she has systematically engaged in financial fraud spanning multiple years. The turning point came when the bank's lead investigator testified. Digital forensics revealed a complex web of financial deception. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my trust fund. She had been running an elaborate scheme of financial manipulation for years. My brother Michael sat with his head in his hands, the weight of his wife's betrayal crushing him. Vanessa's lawyer attempted to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's expression made it clear this was beyond a simple family dispute. "Ms. Reyes," the judge said, addressing Vanessa directly, "you are facing multiple charges of financial fraud, forgery, and theft." When the verdict came, it was decisive. Complete restitution of the stolen funds, additional financial penalties, and potential criminal charges. The trust fund would be fully restored with interest. But this was about more than money. After the hearing, my mother approached me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Elena. We should have seen what was happening." I understood then that this wasn't just about Vanessa's betrayal. It was about breaking a cycle of family silence, of allowing destructive behavior to continue unchecked. "This stops now," I told her quietly. The aftermath was seismic. Michael filed for divorce. Vanessa's professional reputation was destroyed. The family dynamics that had allowed such manipulation were finally exposed to harsh light. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just the money. It was the strength to stand up, to fight back, to protect what was rightfully mine. Months later, I sat in my office, looking at the restored trust fund statement. Mr. Harrison had ensured every cent was returned, with significant interest. "What will you do with it?" Marcus asked. I smiled, remembering my grandmother's words. "I'll use it exactly as she intended, to build something meaningful." Part of the fund would go to establishing a scholarship for students facing financial challenges. Another portion would support legal aid for victims of financial fraud. My grandmother had always believed in turning pain into purpose. Michael reached out, seeking reconciliation. It would take time, but our relationship could heal. "I'm proud of you," he said during our first conversation after everything. "Grandma would be proud too." The trust fund sat in a secure account, no longer just money, but a symbol of resilience, of fighting back, of maintaining integrity when it would have been easier to give up. Vanessa's final attempt to contact me came through a mutual acquaintance, a desperate plea for understanding. I declined to respond. Some betrayals are beyond explanation. As the Seattle sunset painted my office in warm hues, I thought about my grandmother. She had prepared me for this moment my entire life, not just with financial security, but with the courage to stand up for myself. The legacy wasn't just about the money. It was about never becoming a victim, about turning pain into power, about proving that integrity always wins.